Hey there, welcome back to the channel. I'm Ryan, and today we are working on this lovely painting here. We have the reference photo ready to go, and all of these great summer highlights and details. I'm excited about this. We have our pigments to the side, at least a couple of them. We have our oxide black, we have our titanium white. These are Amsterdam. I also have an ultramarine blue, and I used to work a lot with Winsor and Newton, which we will still use a little bit later in the lesson, but I have been enjoying these. I like the consistencies, I like the colors and the pigmentation, and we are going to begin, as we typically do, in the sky here. Now I have my 1-inch flathead brush. Love using this for blocking in the larger areas, and we will begin of course by making our brush just a little bit damp. This is to help make our paint stay wet longer. It's also just going to help us with the blending process and condensing our bristles for a really nice clean sharp stroke. So with that, I'm actually going to change the sky here. I'm going to make it more of a deeper blue gradient to interject some extra color into this. I'm a big believer in having reference photos to help you find details that you wouldn't innately think about and to design your compositions, but I also feel like often we can improve on reference photos and take those artistic liberties, and we're going to do that here today. So with that, I am going to begin again in the sky. I'm going to begin towards the bottom of the sky. We'll work our way up, and towards the bottom it's going to be a bit brighter. There's going to be more light, so we are working with more titanium white in our mixture. We'll grab a little bit of our ultramarine blue, hint of our oxide black. The oxide black is just going to desaturate the blue that we are mixing in here. We don't want it to be too desaturated, so there's a happy middle ground. I think we'll interject just a bit more titanium white, a bit more ultramarine blue. I think that's a great color to start with. And down here you can see there are a lot of sketched clouds. I'm going to work around those to the best of my ability. However, and this is important, remember you can always go back and re-sketch your subjects. If we go over a lot of the trees, if we go over a lot of our clouds, it really isn't a big deal because we can always go back and just re-interject those. That said, you know what I should do? I should make sure I have a sketch, or rather a picture of our reference photo. That way I can post it up over on Patreon, because if I don't have that, I need to take that photo right now so that I can post it for you, and so we can just make this a little bit easier. So don't mind me, I'm just doing a little scroll on the phone, and it seems like we do have our photo. Okay, things are good. So we are going to go back to our reference right there, and you can see we started painting. I kind of let that dry a little bit by accident there, and that's okay. We're just going to go back in, make sure that the pigment is nice and thick still. Then we'll go back here, we'll grab some extra titanium white, extra ultramarine blue. As we continue to move up in the sky, we're going to interject more ultramarine blue into the mix. We'll apply that right above it. And I try not to have the two touch on the initial application. Instead, we apply it all the way across, then we go back down, and then we do our blend. And we do our blend in a bit of an X-shaped pattern, just like this. The X-shaped pattern is going to move pigment not only left and right, but also up and down, which makes it great for blending skies. And then we go back over all of it with a very simple horizontal approach like that. So it starts with an X, and then it gets horizontal. We're going to mix more paint, a little bit more titanium white, a little bit more ultramarine blue. As you can see, we're going all the way across without touching that. We'll also start working this over here, and I did forget to add this color on this side, so if you're watching this before you're painting it, friendly reminder to do so. I'll go back and do it in a little bit, but for now, X-shaped pattern, blend our two mixes, and then soften it with the horizontal markings. It's worth noting, if you're getting a very streaky application here, just try to relieve pressure on your brush. The more pressure you apply, the more streaks you'll create on both ends. It's really easy to avoid if you're just mindful with your application. That said, we double down on our blue. I'm gonna grab a little bit more white just to keep the mix lively and thick. The ultramarine blue from Amsterdam, while I love the hue of it, it's a little bit of a thinner pigment, so you need to either use more layers, more pigment, or you thicken it with a more thick paint, and titanium white is, with most brands, a very innately thick pigment, so it just makes it easy. We're going to blend this X-shaped pattern as we do. We're all quite familiar at this point. And then you can see all of the little brush marks, which we are going to remove with these horizontal marks. Now, a lot more blue in this next mix. We're getting very close to the top. And I know it seems like we're spending, 5 minutes on painting a simple sky gradient, but I remember when I just started painting for the first time, really the first couple of years actually, I would find skies intimidating because I would find gradients difficult. And it's one of those things where it can be easy once you get the hang of it, but it can also be one of those things you need to be mindful with until it feels intuitive. And I feel like I'm there now, but I think it's good to take your time, warm up, make sure you do it right. We don't need to rush this. And I will say, already, it's a pretty great gradient. I think we did a good job here today. It's worth noting that if your pigments are a little bit thin, as you can see it drying, you can always just go back in and add another layer. This might be okay. We'll wait and see as it dries. But here, same process, taking out the streaks. We'll also add a couple clouds in here in just a second. Beautiful. Okay, so we fully let that dry. Just gone in and done a little bit of a sketch here using a Conte. This is fantastic for drawing on dry acrylic paint because it typically just comes off with a little bit of water and you can allocate different colors for your sketches. That said, we are going to work on our clouds, and again, they're not in the reference photo, but we did sketch them in earlier. And these are going to be done with a lot more titanium white. We have a little bit of our blue still on the brush and in the water, so it will dilute it. And we can go with this. We can also warm it up just a little bit by taking a burnt sienna. This is also from the same brand, which is Amsterdam. And we can grab just a hint of that. I like to do this just so my clouds have a little bit of sun in them. It just gives them that warmer feeling. We'll mix that up. We'll switch on over to a brand new brush, that being the liner. And as you can see, it's a little bit fluffy right now, but when we add the water to it, we wipe off that extra water. It's nice and sharp, great for fine detail work. And these clouds are going to do two different things. We're going to have some at the top which act as leading lines and point the eye in towards the center here. Then we're going to have some that just settle at the bottom in more horizontal applications. So we're going to start by just creating some of these horizontal ones down towards the base. My brush is a little bit wet so that I can get good life out of the pigment. But you can see that the value of this is actually quite similar to the blue that we had prior, and that's great because it means that it'll blend pretty naturally. It doesn't stick out. It's more of a nice little detail than it is this dramatic addition. And I'm making these horizontal markings, but I'm also trying to make little portions of them stick up and be a bit more unique. It's not a perfect line and it's not meant to be. Now we can have it kind of come down here, and then the majority of it is going to be at the base as that comes across as well. We want varying sized clouds. This is all a very easy way of accomplishing a slightly more interesting background. Here we had a mountain, and that was great, but I think we can just do more than that. Doesn't have to be a lot more, doesn't have to take away from the foreground. And that's another important lesson I feel like I didn't learn early on in my painting journey, is that typically you want different elements and portions of the painting to not be that detailed, because if they are, then you kind of run the risk of having the eye not really settle anywhere. It's just kind of jumping around all the time. Where with this, the eye knows where to go. There are definitive endpoints and good control. Okay, that said, I think this looks really good. We are going to grab a bit more pigment. We're going to head up here. And when we work on the larger clouds like this one, we're going to apply pigment in the very middle of the cloud. Like you can see, we'll take more of the pigment off in other middle sections of larger clouds. We'll take off the extra pigment, going with just a damp brush. Then we'll blend out the edges to be a bit softer. And the idea is the middle of the clouds are nice and opaque. They have more actual cloud there. The light doesn't really get through. But towards the edges, you can see the sky kind of bleed through. And that's because that cloud, that section of the cloud, just isn't that thick. And this is a great way of developing depth very quickly in your little clouds. So a lot of it is pointing this way to lead the eye in, and then we'll do a couple smaller wispy ones to continue helping with that larger idea. You can see it kind of gets a little more horizontal as we get down here. A little bit more faint. You can make them more faint by just using less pigment and more water. Here's a good example. So just hints of it. And again, we're not looking for anything too dramatic. We just want to aid the painting a little bit, create those movements, make it look natural, and that's really just about it there. We can go back into the centers and make them a little bit more dramatic if we want to, but for the most part, I think we keep this simple. There are just a couple of spots we make sure are in nicely. And then maybe we can just add a little bit of a wisp in the center here to tie these clouds in with these ones. That way it doesn't look like it's happening in two separate areas, but there's a little bit of a transition. Though I don't want this to be any more dramatic than what we have around the edges. So I think this right here is pretty great. Especially for the start, we can always go back in and add more detail. But for the beginning, I think we keep it pretty simple. And this to me looks quite good. We can also cover up a lot of this with trees, so you have more leeway to play right along this tree line rather than over towards the center middle area. And that's why I'm still kind of going at it a little bit. We can also make this mix a bit more white, so we're just adding additional white. Can apply that into the base here. Have a little bit of variation of value, and again, very simple practices, but just like that, I think the sky looks a whole lot better. Okay, so our paint is all nice and dry. We are going to move on to the next step, and that means working on the trees in the background. And not these trees, but rather the ones that you can see behind these ones. It's a lower shelf of them right through there. You can see this highlight of gold just stretching through the middle. That's the tops of those trees receiving a lot of light. The bottom area still a bit darker, and that is all happening right through here. So this is actually our next step, and it's a step I'm very excited about. We are going to go in with our larger flat-headed brush, as we typically do. However, we do need more pigment on the palette. We're going to start with a sap green for the initial application. So we'll just unscrew this, put that there, good amount. We are going to be using a lot of green in this painting, and I'm very happy that we are, because it was winter for a long time here in Canada, and I really missed all of the greens. I think every morning I wake up, I look out the window, I see the trees, and I just feel good. So we are going to spend more time with trees here today, painting them. And we're going to do so by, again, taking our sap green. We do start with the sap green. I like sap green because it's very neutral green. It's not too vibrant. It's not vibrant. It's not really cool or warm. If you think about the primary colors to me, it's kind of the primary green. It's not technically the primary green, but it feels like the primary green. So we are going to take this, start a new mix on our palette. We're going to mix up a mid-value green. So we want this to be a green that can get a lot darker, but also a lot brighter. We also don't want to be too saturated. So it's a very middle of the road green, and we'll have it lean slightly towards a brighter variant. Then we're going to go in here, and you can see we have a lot of sketch. We're just going to cover that up. We can always go back in and re-sketch it. We'll move our phone case over just a little bit. Avoid making that too artsy. Though you know what? Really artsy phone case can be nice. I feel like when I was younger I would paint on everything. Make everything unique and in the palettes I like, and you know, paint isn't meant to go on everything, so it doesn't always stick and adhere, but it was fun and it was creative and it got me making things, and I think that's really the important part of all of it. And the first step here is very simple. It's this basic backing. We want this to be nice and thick. If you want, it can have texture in it. You can go in with a bunch of different taps and strokes. You can make it look clean. We're going to use this as a backing layer. We're going to add shadows on top, and then we're going to add highlights on top of that. For shadows, we're just going to add a little bit of oxide black into that mix. We're just making it a little bit darker. And we don't want it to be a lot darker because this is pretty far away in the painting, and the farther away a subject is, the more atmospheric light it adopts, the less heavy the contrast is, so it doesn't have as dark darks as the foreground will have. So we want this to be darker, but not too much. And then we'll switch over to a brand new brush. This is our fan brush, and this is what I love to use for adding texture. Now, I'm not going to make this wet. We want all of these bristles to remain nice and sharp, nice and individual. If we were to dip it in the water, they would condense and we get larger applications, less applications, and that can be great for foliage in the foreground, but for details and foliage in the background, we want all of those individual little markings. And I think a lot of people like to do this when they start painting with their liner brush, but the liner brush doesn't make small enough markings to do so effectively. So we're working with this, and this is a stiff bristled fan brush. It's also out of my brush set, so if you are looking for brushes, you can find mine in the video description. I work with the same brush set for all of these videos, and if you get this brush set, you never have to worry if yours is the same or different. That said, we are going to pick up this pigment, both sides, and then we're going to go in and we're just going to tap little markings and impressions into our green. Now, if you wait for the underlayer to fully dry before doing this, you'll get more dramatic markings. It'll be the hue, the value will be more akin to what we have on the palette. Because it's still wet, we're getting a bit of a combination of the two, and I'm okay with that because it's just giving us a little bit more opportunity for range, in that if we do this and then we let it dry and then we go in yet again with this, then we're going to have what we're currently working with, which is a blend of the old application and the new darker application. So we can have a lot going on despite the fact that we're not working with truly dark values and despite the fact that it is in the background. This may require quite a few applications. As you can see, I'm going back quite a lot here, but that's okay. We will end up with a much nicer piece because of that extra time and attention to detail. So we're just throwing that on. Now we will go a little bit darker with our larger mix. Add in some extra green. Beautiful, earthy, good shadow pigments. We'll pick that up yet again. And it's worth noting that the darker the pigments, the more I'm going to want to apply it towards the bottom and not so much the top. The top of this tree line is going to receive a lot more light than the bottom. So the shadows as well are going to be brighter because they're not going to be as dense. The foliage, it'll get a little bit less tight towards the top, more light will be let through. But towards the bottom you do have a lot of dense foliage, and then you get a lot of dense darks. So we start at the bottom, we work our way up, we let it dissipate, and then we naturally have this gradient of taps that go from fairly dark to brighter. It's also worth noting that I'm rotating my brush quite a lot. However, those rotations are almost always happening in the air, never actually on the canvas. Because if we were to do so on the canvas, then we'd run into the tricky situation of streaks and longer markings. But we don't want that. We want lots of sharp little impressions. I just realized my hand might be in the way as I'm doing this. I'm going to be much more mindful of that from here on out. I'm going to hold my brush like this instead, and I'm going to hope deeply that I haven't been doing that too much. If so, I apologize. But from here on out, we are mindful. I'm still getting used to painting with the top-down camera. I used to have it looking at it from the side, and that just made things a little more intuitive. But I think this is better for you to see, so figured we'd switch. It's taking me a little while to learn the right ways to interact with it, but we're getting there. And again, I think the painting lessons are better for it. So, yet again, making it darker, yet again, going into the bottom. And again, you can let all of this dry before you go in. However, it has been drying this whole time. So, progressively, we do get to where we want to go with this. I actually really like that. I also noted that I rotate the brush a lot, but I don't know that I mentioned why. We essentially, with this brush, if you press it all the way in, you kind of create a line, and I'll show you what I mean. See that? Where it's upwards? We don't really want that happening. So what we do is we press only about a third of the brush into the canvas. It's not the whole thing. It's just a bit of it. And I rotate so that if we do accidentally create lines, they crisscross. You get more of a crosshatch look. It isn't obvious that it's a singular line. And it just takes that out. If you do get a line, you kind of hope that it's vertical, because at that point it just looks like a tree lost in the foliage. But this is a good system for getting it the way you want. Okay. I think we are just about done with this process. I do want to let this actually properly fully dry before we move on to the next step, but so far so good. And this is a brush where I don't really like to get it wet right now because I don't want to condense those bristles. However, if we're letting this dry, it will dry in the brush as well. And if we let it dry in the brush, then we ruin our brush. So I'm going to wash the brush, but I'm going to dry it very, very well before we jump into our next technique. I'm also going to take this opportunity to clean my water dish and that brush, because our next mix is going to be a bit brighter, and we don't want the bluish gray in the water to dilute it in the mix. So just a couple things to keep in mind. Take a little break, have some water, clean your water, and your brush as well. Okay, so this is fully dry to the touch. That is clean. We cleared off most of our palette, and now we are switching to a brand new pigment. This is by Golden. It is a green gold, and this is actually the only golden color I really like. My partner loves this brand, and she swears by it. However, I personally feel like it's often a little bit more thin, and sometimes it has a bit of a sheen that I don't love. This color, however, is perfect. It is my favorite green gold by miles, and we are going to use that here today. So we are taking this out. This is fantastic for real highlights. And as you can see, right next to the sap green, it does have a little bit more vibrancy. It's a little bit brighter, it's a little bit warmer, and it will be perfect for the light on the tops here. Now I am going to grab for the mix the larger flat-headed brush, also fully clean. We'll make sure that it's a little bit damp. We'll grab our green gold, we'll grab some titanium white, and look at that beautiful, vibrant, bright, very much alive. We can also add a little bit of our sap green in, just so we have a good transition color, and a hint of our oxide black, just so it's not too vibrant on initial application. Now this is quite vibrant, it's quite bright, and it's actually just what we want. So I'm going back to my fan brush. It is now fully dry. It is also clean. We're going to grab pigment on both sides. And these trees, for the most part, are more rounded in shape, where the ones that are in front are a bit more vertical. And because these are rounded in shape, a lot of our applications are going to create a rounded look. So we can have this protrude out towards the top, and then we come back down. I'm only using about 1/3 of the brush. And you can see as we do move down and in, that we're doing so in lines that move like this. Very much akin to the actual shape of the tree. Like so. Nice and easy, good start. You can see it doesn't look too dramatically different from what we already have on there, but it does add a highlight, does add a pop of color. Does look really good to begin with. We don't want to do too much, and we want it to dissipate as we move further down, because we're just going to lose those highlights towards the bottom as we move into the shadow areas. Now I think we need more pigment, so we'll just remix this. White, a lot of green gold, a little bit of sap green, hint of our oxide black. That's good pigment. We'll head over here. It's also worth noting that most of these trees will be covered up in the end, so don't worry too much if it's not perfect. This is kind of like a practice layer, but you will have portions of it showing through, so you do want to give it a good try, right? Here we're going to do another little tree towards the bottom. Just create some variance, some extra volume. Really like the start of how these are evolving, but they will look a lot better in soon applications. The near future, if you will. So more taps, little impressions here and there. Oh, there we go. I like that. Beautiful. Now, yet again, we build up our highlights. That is only layer 1 of our highlight. We will have money. So, more titanium white, more green gold. We are going to slowly move away from the sap green and the oxide black. And when I say slowly, I mean slowly. So, we will still have some sap green in this mix. Then we'll go back, we'll grab this. More of these pure highlights towards the top. And this is where it really starts to build volume. Oh yeah. That's beautiful. We're getting there. Going to make these taps a bit tighter towards the top. Another easy way of inserting that real highlighted volume. Beauty. I'm not going to do too much detail back here because, again, we're going to have trees in front of it, but just enough. And right now, I think you can see a lot of separation between the taps and the line work, right? We can see them here, 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 and that's fine. However, again, because it's the background, we want less detail, not more. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to add more taps and just kind of disrupt that general line work that we have. Take out more of those shadows and still just more of this wider tapped effect. It doesn't have to be too noticeable. And we'll do this a lot quicker in the near future. But I think for the first application, you should really take your time and just get comfy with it. I find I have some good days with this. I find I have some not so intuitive days with it as well. And so I just like to give myself that leeway to get comfy within the application style. Again, very simple. I can see a lot of line work in there. Let's try to break that up. Very good. Still lessening as we move down towards the base, as it should. Little taps of highlights here and there, but nothing too dramatic. Now let's go even brighter. Titanium white, green gold. Now it's just these two. We have eliminated the sap green, we have eliminated the oxide black. We'll apply this very specifically towards the top. We will start losing detail through the many applications because the more layers we add, the more shadows we take out, the less variance we create. And that's okay because we're creating this larger gradient, but just recognize that throughout this process you will be letting go of detail, and that's okay. It's meant to be. Not every portion of the painting is meant to be hyper detailed, and it'll actually be a lot better if some areas give you that room to breathe. It also looks less line work heavy as we continue, and I think this is pretty great. So I'm just going to clean up the tops, and then I think we move on to our next step. Okay, so at this point we are going to switch to working on these trees right here. They're quite big, they're quite tall, they really protrude in front of these guys, and they're quite fun to render, but we're going to begin quite simply by making a through line for them. We'll do so with the liner brush. We'll make sure that's nice and damp. We'll grab just a little bit of our oxide black, hint of our sap green, that way it has the reflective qualities of all of the green trees around it. When you're looking at a subject in the distance, it isn't its innate color, it's the color of the sky reflecting on it, it's the color of the other subjects around it reflecting on it. And because there's so much green in this area, the bark and that center of the tree will have a lot of reflective greens. So we want some of that sap green, but because it's not a bright area, you don't want it to be a bright green, so it's not the green gold, it's the sap green. And we'll also grab a little bit of our ultramarine blue. Mix those together. Hint of our titanium white, not too much. And we'll just create the centers for some of these guys. And it's going to be pretty tall. I can see, again, we could go back to the traceable and resketch these exactly as it is, but I can see it's on this grid line right here. Goes up to about there. So I'm just going to create a line. We're going to try to make sure this isn't perfectly straight, so it kind of goes back and forth a little bit, gets a little bit bigger towards the bottom. Good. We want it to have character. I think the thing we really don't want to do is neglect making it look unique. So I try to make lots of little taps in my drag. It's not one continuous stroke, it's many accumulating. And then there's another little one right down here. Again, we talked about our reasoning for why all of these are the shape they are and how we go about rendering them in the sketching video. And by the way, if you watched the sketching video, that means you are a supporter of the channel, and I just want to say I really appreciate you. Thank you for making such an impact. Thank you for making these lessons possible. I wouldn't be able to put the time into making these real-time, elaborate chats if it wasn't for you and your support. So thank you for quite literally making this lesson happen. Very much love doing this, and again, couldn't do it without you. It's also worth noting that if you are up over on Patreon and you didn't see, you can get the traceable download there. Now you can also get the real time, I think it's like a 30 or 40 minute video of me actually sketching this out from the reference photo, and you can download the reference photo too, but all of that good stuff is there as per usual. We also just started a brand new big painting series, which I'm pretty excited about, pretty proud of. I'll show it to you actually. We have it right here. It's a big one. Working on the sky currently, very colorful. Pretty excited about that. We start the mountain this week, and that's a multi-part series, so we'll work on that over the next month. Really put a lot of time into each piece of it. It's one of the reasons I went with such a bright blue piece this time around. We're doing a very colorful sky over there, and I thought it would be fun to create a couple different things, you know? Now I'm going back and I'm doing a second layer over some of the midsections that were just a little bit thin because we did use water, and water is great because it condenses the bristles. It makes it easier to make those sharper markings, but it also makes things a little bit thin here and there. So just making sure those are nice and thick, and then we can also do little ones that are not as thick once we start to run out of pigment. And this is just the implication of additional trees in the background. I'm going to try and make these look even smaller. So less pressure with my brush. They don't go as high. They're just accent pieces, essentially. If we just had these larger ones and no others, it would probably look a little artificial, a little staged. And we want it to look organic, and that means things are going to get a little busy, maybe even a little messy, but that'll make it look more real. And so far, I really like these a lot. I think the more I do here, the more I think I can make that a little taller. I can make that a little taller. Because I made those taller, I can also make this a little taller. And the whole idea there is we want all of these to be different heights so that the eye is constantly bouncing from area to area. It's not stagnant. We talked about that a lot in the sketching video, but yeah, you just want your subjects to always be at different levels to keep the eye moving. I really like this one. Yeah, that looks good. Our next step is going to be adding the foliage for it and these trees, and then we're going to continue to work our way forward in the painting. I do want this to dry, but I'm pretty confident by the time we do our next mix, this will be dry. So we're going to switch our brush. We're not going to take a break this time around, and we are going to mix up, again, another mid to dark green. So sap green, a little bit of green gold, a little bit of oxide black, a little bit of titanium white. Get that good neutral green. It can be a little bit more saturated than the background green that we used here because we are moving slightly forward in the painting. We don't want it to be a lot, but it can be a little bit more saturated for sure. Like so. And I don't want to apply it with this brush because we have a very minimal amount of space. So I think I'm actually going to do so with the liner. Now, when we start, we begin at the top, and a lot of the branches at the top move upwards. So, kind of like this. They're kind of pointing towards the sky. We're leaving little openings in between. My applications aren't really drags for the most part, they're taps. So you can see openings in between a lot of the branches. Trying to make both sides quite different from each other. So if I make a protrusion here and it's pretty grand, I'm not going to do that on the other side. I'll probably go down a little bit, and then I'll make one that's a little bit bigger. And this is one of those things where if you've done it before, it'll probably come across pretty quickly. If you're new to this technique, then I would take a little bit more time than I am here. But the whole idea is you just want all of your branches to look like they are consistently evolving. And this is good. This is very good. Beautiful. As we get towards the middle, the branches stop going up so much, and instead they start going to the side. And then towards the bottom, they go down. The whole idea there is the branches at the top are very light because they're not super developed yet. Branches in the middle are starting to get some weight, so they even out, and the branches towards the bottom have a lot of weight, so they start to droop a little bit. We're just trying to be mindful of the amount of weight of each branch and how it's moving with the rest. We're also now in the middle here, which means we are covering up a lot of past detail, and that's okay. That's one of those things where, again, we simplify. And with acrylics, you're often covering up old layers to create new layers. Big part of the process. I might make my mix a little bit darker as we move farther down, because even the mid values will be a little bit darker because we're getting farther and farther away from the light. Yeah, that's perfect actually. And then our taps will get wider, get a little more expansive. We'll start to meet with this guy. They'll overlap each other, so things again will get a little bit messy, but they are meant to, and that's okay. You can see a little bit of that green tree behind. That's why we weren't too worried about that backing application. We're going to see a lot of it over here, but towards this midsection, it's just not that prevalent through our new trees. And then we can leave some of the bottoms a bit more open, I think. Especially if these are walkable paths. Those areas are typically, even if not intentionally cut, end up being a little bit more sparse just from people traveling through and the natural movements that we create. The impacts that we have on lands like these, right? Oh, I love that so much. Okay, let's actually make the camera a little bit brighter for you. It's getting a bit darker outside. I want to make sure that this looks nice and airy, bright in the way that it feels, you know? So again, some of this I'm taking my time, some of this I'm kind of furiously tapping my way through. And I think there's a middle ground for most of us, but I feel like there's some areas where I'm very comfy and there are other areas where I feel like I could be fairly mindful and really take the time. Okay, we continue. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Love it. Always feels great when it starts to come together once you start to see it. Now our next mix will be a bit darker, but I do want to let this dry, so yet again we'll take a minute to break. And then as soon as it's dry, we'll go in with our next layer. Very good. Okay, so we're back from a brief little break there, and we're going to do the shadows within here. Now I'm starting with some of our oxide black. I'm not grabbing any of the green gold for these, and we're not going to apply it the way we just did with the fan brush. Instead, we are applying it with our liner. Now, we want this to be a little bit damp. We want to go in with similar applications to what we just did, so it's lots of little taps stretching outwards. However, we're only doing this into the center areas of the larger applications that we just made. So we are building the shadows because the light is going this way. It's behind the areas that we're painting. Rather, the areas that we're painting are behind the light. So we are creating the shadows It's also, because the light's going this way, there's going to be more shadows on the right-hand side than the left. So we can build these out. And already we have multiple values. We have some depth. And I'm very happy. The more we build this out, the more it'll make sense, but just trust the process. I know it'll look a little bit stark initially, and that's okay. It's meant to. We do want this to pop and stand out from the background. And we will get there relatively shortly. Very good. Now we'll skip on over to the next tree, I think. And if we want to go back and add more of this later, we can. I just don't want to do too much too early. I'm a big believer in you do just enough, and then you move on to a new subject and you wait and see how it resonates. Because sometimes you end up feeling like you do need to go back and do more, but a lot of times you say, once you have more established, oh, you know what, that is the right amount, and I don't want to overcomplicate the area or have it compete too much with other areas. So we start with the less is more approach, as we are here, and then we'll build as we need to, as we see fit. Beautiful. Now I think we actually need more pigment. We'll grab the oxide black, the sap green, hint of titanium white. Again, we don't need the green gold for the darker mix. Lots of little taps. If you end up making a mix that's a bit darker than your previous ones, I recommend going back in and introducing those really dark values into your past areas as well. That way it all feels cohesive. So we're just going back into our favorite spots, the areas that are truly dark there. It's okay to leave openings, and we will most certainly do so as well. So far, so good. I might make mine a bit more open as a whole than what we see in the reference photo, just so we have a bit more complex layering. But you'll see what I really mean as we continue. These paintings always get me so excited to go for summer walks. Just trying to go for a few about a week ago, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, kind of felt like winter again there for a second. That is, it's living in Toronto, it's living in Canada. One of those things where we talk about Fool's Spring, which is spring where it's warm for a day or two and you think, oh, spring's here, we're going to be out in our t-shirts, and and then it snows. And I think that happened to us 3 or 4 times this year, and now I feel like we're getting Fool's Summer, which is, again, you put on the shorts and you go for these very leisurely long walks, and then you realize, oh no, it's still spring. We still bring light jackets with us where we go, and that's just smart. But regardless, did get to go on a couple really nice warm walks about a week and a half ago, and it was pretty wonderful. So now we're just living vicariously through our painting until we can do that again. I feel like every season on the channel I always talk about little walks to do, and just the appreciation of the changing seasons. Here again in Ontario, I think we get a lot of everything, especially aesthetically. In the fall, you have all of the warm oranges and yellows, and that's pretty wonderful. But I think because it is all relatively short-lived, you end up missing it and really appreciating it. So as a landscape artist, it's a pretty wonderful place to be. Lots of scenes like this. I think something I want to do is create more trees in between with just that same general idea. So I'm going to tap in some extra markings there, maybe some extra markings here, just make it a bit more full looking. I think when it looks like we just have a line of 4 trees, it's a little unnatural. The easy way around that is just creating more trees within this space. So, lots of little taps. Also try to make it so that they're not all the same distance apart. Here I'm going to put another really close one in so that things are starting to feel like they're layered in front of each other a little bit more. That's really, really important actually with these. You can see it gets quick and easy once you're 5 or 6 trees in. The techniques are comfy and you can just kind of roll with the process. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Okay. Getting quite happy with this. You can see that we're slowly expanding upon the old applications now because we have everything else in there and we say, you know what, maybe that could be a little darker, maybe that could be a little more stark, maybe that could be a little more full. You just kind of go back and forth until you have all those answers that you want. Oh yeah. Hope you're having a good time. If you're painting along, I hope you're starting to see that success and feel it. If you're just watching, thinking about doing the painting, I hope you're starting to get motivated. Excited about making something new, getting creative. For me, to be honest, I feel like the hardest part is always starting. And if you're like me, the best tip I have for you is just put paint on the palette, because then it'll start to dry and you'll feel the timeline of actually just getting started. And then you prep everything and, you know. But I find that works incredibly well for me because you just don't want to waste the paint. And all it takes is opening a tube and putting it down. Okay, I think these trees are all quite nice. Anything, I think we just do a couple more little lines down here, and now I think we let this dry and then we come back in with a highlight. In the meantime, we're going to take that same dark pigment that we have on our large flat-headed brush. We're going to put it down towards the bottom of the grass right in here, and we're going to create a base layer for our grass. Just lots of bushes and such to be implemented. We want it to be fairly flat on the horizon, and then it curves this way, it curves this way, it gets bigger as it curves outwards. Like so. And that's an easy way to start. So, very happy with that. We could also start here, but I almost feel like if we work in a more compartmentalized way, we'll not get overwhelmed. And I think seeing the success of that motivates us to find the success in this, and the success in here will motivate us to find the success over here, and so on. So we're going to take it slow, take it easy, and just paint in a way that we find relaxing but also motivating. That said, going to let this dry for another 3-ish minutes, probably get a little glass of water, stay hydrated. This is your reminder to also stay hydrated and healthy through the painting process. I know we're artists, it's so easy to just stop painting or continue painting for 12 hours at a time, forget to do anything else. So friendly reminder, do take care of yourself and be healthy through the process. Okay, so we've given things a good amount of time to dry, and dry they are, so we're going to move on to the highlights in our trees. We'll do so by taking the larger flat-headed brush, our green gold, titanium white, and I think we'll just stick to these two for now because we are working in an area that's receiving a lot of light. Now we could tap it on with our fan brush. If we do, we need to make sure it's very, very dry, so we're just wiping off all of the extra water. Something else you can do to make it more dry, just rub the bristles back and forth with your finger. You can see the water is coming off in my hand just a little bit. We're going to continue to do that until it's well taken care of. Now, we can grab our pigment with this brush as we have before, and the actual applications are going to be more intentional this time. I'm going to do it on the angle in which the branches protrude. So here it's kind of more out and towards the top. There we go. We're doing it predominantly on the left-hand side of the trees. We're starting at the tops and then we'll work our way down, but we'll do so over time. Again, going for that less is more application approach. There we go. Going to make sure that we get it for even the little trees in the back. And then we can make it a bit more full, move it down, have it wrap around the tree just a little bit. It'll wrap around more towards the very top because the very top is going to be more open. There's less foliage for the light to work through. So it just makes sense that there is more brightness up here. Being fairly careful with this, but it also doesn't have to be perfect because it is nature. It's natural. It's meant to be a little unique here and there. And then I'm going to throw, speaking of making it unique here and there, little spots of light in towards the bottom, like so. Creates slightly more separation and gives it that nice variance as well. So I really like what we have going on here. We need to add a little bit of a highlight in towards the middle strands of the trees, the connective vertical lines, just so that it looks like the foliage is fully wrapping around and it's not just existing on a singular side. But that alone, I like a lot. We might as well put that back in some water for a minute. We'll take our liner brush, grab more of the highlight, and now we'll just do very intentional taps to round out the areas that we love and we really want to solidify. I did the majority with a fan brush, A, because it's quicker, B, because it makes smaller markings, C, because the randomization of it makes it look natural. However, there are going to be areas that you do want to make definitive, and this is the far easier way of doing that rather than over tapping with a fan brush trying to accomplish a tiny little area and getting a lot of other ones in the process around it. This is just an easy way of ensuring that these ideas work and work well. Okay. Very good. There we go. Now we can continue working on the areas down here, at which point I'm actually going to change our mix a little bit. I want this to be grassy, but I also want it to have little bushes. So we're going to go back to our sap grain because we want to slightly darker green as well. It's going to be a mix of the two. It's going to have a little bit of oxide black. And honestly, that's pretty lovely for a highlight in an area that's receiving a lot of shadow. Now, we can apply it a couple different ways. We could use a liner brush and we could go down to the bottom and we could just do lots of mild impressions like this across that horizon. You know, nothing too dramatic. This will take a bit more time. These markings will be a little bit bigger. However, if you want to make it a bit sharper, then of course we switch back to the fan brush, which we do need to make dry. And I think as I move down here, I want to make the markings a lot darker. So more oxide black, more sap green, not green gold. Remember, we are trying to remove the warmth out of the shadow hues. I think that's actually quite nice. I'm going to dry this to the best of my ability here. Do those little scratches back and forth. That looks great. Grab pigment on both sides. And from here, I think we just go in and we tap that throughout, trying to leave little openings of the darker mixtures underneath. Creating that texture. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, from there, I think we go a little bit brighter. Simply do that by adding in some green gold. Really don't do much there. Grab that green gold. And then I think the area that protrudes, so the area that's farther away from this, is going to get this highlight. And then we'll work it back up. And the idea here is that this is all creating shadow, as are these. But the farther we get away from them, the more opportunity light has to present itself again. Now, because we're painting on a lot of wet layers, this is going to blend to a point. It's not going to be as bright as we have on the palette, and that's actually okay. It'll just create a nice subtle transition from one into the next, and it doesn't need to be anything more dramatic than what we have there. Though we can continue to create additional bushes and variances in this area, taking more green gold, titanium white, make that mix brighter. Continue to do more of that transitionary work. Let it run out as we get towards the top. Good start. There's a lot we can do in this space, but for now I think we keep it simple. And I'm quite happy. Something else we can do is create a little bit more of a soft transition from these darks into these. So we'll grab some of our oxide black, work that into the mix, and then with our liner brush we'll just tap on some little bushes and connective tissue essentially. Have it work its way up. Beautiful. Like that a lot. Okay, so from here, I'm going to add some mild highlights, just little intentional spots. Again, we did most of it with the fan. Now I'm doing this with the liner once I feel comfy. And I might make this area, I'm going to try just making it a bit darker. We have that bright line. I want to see if we have more depth without it. This is another big part of painting. It's the trial and error. I always like to show myself making mistakes in these videos when I do. That way you can see A, how to fix it, B, that it happens and that's okay. But I also want to show when I'm just kind of exploring. I think I like that. I think I'll only know if I want to highlight there when more of the painting is developed. So for now, I think that's good. And aside from other little highlights we could throw in here, I think we are ready for the next step. Okay, so from here we are actually going to work on the water at the bottom, and typically we work background to foreground. However, this is more so under in the background than these trees or even this, because this grass, the rocks at the bottom here, the foliage, that all overlaps this area. So it'll be a lot easier if we paint this first and then everything else on top of it. It'll just save us a lot of time and effort, and it does kind of give us a test as to our values and our ideas of coloration, because this has a slight reflection from the top. You can see the golds and the greenish yellows through here that mirror these. You can see that the under area is darker. This area is quite a bit darker, and it's nice that it is, because it creates a vignette effect which helps bring the eye into the center and that really light area. This is also quite dark. You have a little bit of a highlight from this in the water here, though it's almost fully obstructed by these movements, which will be a lot of fun. Though this is essentially our next step, and then once we have that incorporated, we can work on that. Maybe we go in and we add some extra warm yellow highlights to the tops here, and then we can start working on this area. But the next step is the water. So let's put this down. Let's focus you where you need to be looking. We'll switch on over to the larger flat-headed brush. Make sure that's nice and damp, and we'll grab a bit of our sap green, because we do want the water to actually be green, not blue. It has a lot of these green reflections from the trees, and that's for the most part. There might be a little bit of blue down here, but for the most part we are looking at green. So we'll start there. We'll get some oxide black, grab a hint of titanium white, and that'll be probably pretty perfect for our edge right here. Now, my brush is quite damp, and as you can see in the mix on the canvas, there are a lot of areas that are semi-transparent, especially here. This means we will more than likely have to do 2 layers, and it's also worth noting I'm just about out of sap green on my palette, so we'll add a bit more. Again, this is a Winsor & Newton. I think it's the only Winsor & Newton I'm using in this. I might grab a cadmium yellow deep hue from Winsor & Newton, which I really like because it's a thick, warm yellow, great for highlights. But for now, I think we'll stick with that. Hint of titanium white to desaturate and thicken. We'll go back over this, do another little layer. It'll be dark right underneath, so we'll just have that like that. And then as you move out, it'll get a bit brighter. It's also worth noting that as I create these transitions and these blends, I try to make the edges pretty soft. So here you can see it's quite opaque, and then it's less opaque, and then we have the actual open canvas. That's really how we want to prioritize it for the most part. Then when we get into this area, which is going to be brighter because of the highlights from the trees, we'll grab our green gold, grab our titanium white, a little bit of our sap green, and then if this jets out like that, then it'll jet out like that. Again, it's just letting us pre-practice what we're going to do for our foliage up top. And then there's a second tree over here, which is going to have some highlight. I can see just a hint of it. So we'll blend all of this X-shaped pattern for the most part. However, if you have little brush strokes in here, I don't think it matters too much for the initial pass anyway. We are going to eventually want to move it all in the shape of water, and that was a good movie. It was a good film. Guillermo del Toro directed, I believe. It's quite good. But we are just going to move our water now like this. So I've switched my brush to the more horizontal position, and we're just doing movements out that follow this edge. So I go like that, and then it gets a bit more flat as we get towards the central area, and then we start to move in these more spiral movements. You can just start sketching these on with paint to get the flow moving, and then the taps get a lot smaller as we move into the background, and they move in that general direction. So let's continue building this out as we should. We need to go back to a darker mix on the other side, so more of our sap green, oxide black, titanium white, just a little bit. Start putting this on the other side. I think we need more titanium white. It's a little too saturated for the water. We want it to be a green, but not as green as the top for the most part. So we'll just desaturate that. And this is one of those things where in a photo of the painting, or even in the final painting, it'll look really complicated. You'll question, how do you do that? You know, one of those things that looks really hard, actually very easy with this technique. Quite simple, very intuitive. It just comes together. It flows like water in all of the ways we would hope it does. So I like that a lot, actually. It almost has a little bit of a glow to it. Then we have more of that nice highlight pigment to mirror that through here. So we'll just work those markings in, and then we can paint around it. It's all a lot easier while it's still wet, which is why I'm continuously making my brush pretty damp. Now this is darker, we put it underneath. It's not that much darker though, it's just a little bit darker. And it can be darker on the outskirts too. I do feel like painting relatively quickly here will help. And if that's something that you find a little bit intimidating, don't worry, because we are working with acrylics, we are working with water. Because of that, we will likely have to go in and do a second, third layer maybe. So everything you're painting, you're probably covering up again in another layer, just so it's nice and thick. You don't have to, but typically part of the process. And because of that, your first layer is more of a practice layer. It's more of a base layer. It's more just feeling it out and making sure you like what you're doing. There we go. A little bit of green gold because we're transitioning off that. I already love it. So relieving. I'm also going back and repainting things a couple of times over. You'll see that I've gone over these spots more than twice, and that's so that I do get that layering in. So we do end up with something relatively thick, at least thick enough. Might taper this a little bit more. Now it's less definitive what is land and what is water, which I kind of like. All subjects don't have to be standout, and often I think things look a little more natural if they're more amalgamated, built into one another. Oh, I love this. Hope you're having fun. Hope you're enjoying. Hope you're getting inspired. I feel like this is one of those sections that just really brightened up my creative mood. I was already having a lot of fun, but things like this, sometimes they have a real impact, you know? And I'm trying to create that same swirl effect with my brush strokes, so there's those general ideas in the movements. You can't really see it right now because a lot of the values are so similar, but texturally, if there is any texture, because it's acrylics, there probably won't be a lot of texture, but if there is a little bit of texture, you will feel it. You will see it as the canvas moves through light, and that's a big part of it. So we have the reflection that goes like that. Then we probably have a little bit of blue there. Let's interject that. Grab some of that ultramarine. Haven't done so in a while, but this will be really nice actually, because it'll tie the top and the bottom of the canvas together rather than just having blues up there. We're going to be really careful. I think it just belongs in this space, and it doesn't need to be a lot. just a hint. Honestly, I think that added a lot of color complexity. Maybe because these are a bit lower, we can do that over here too. Didn't initially intend to, but this is one of those situations where you take artistic liberties, you just kind of flow with the painting in all of the ways that it seems to want to take you. If we can make it better, we'll make that effort to do exactly that, right? Oh yeah. This really came together quickly in quite a lovely way. That said, we still have a lot of details to add in the water. This is just our first layer. It's just a base, but I think it's a very promising one for the near future. I'm going to try to break this up a little bit more because it's pretty distinct, pretty definitive. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay. Well, at this point, I think we let that dry for now. And in the meantime, we can actually go back up here and work on that because we want to layer it on top. We start with a mid, probably dark green actually. Let's go with our sap green, our oxide black, hint of titanium white. We're just going to start with a very dark base layer. Then we'll build on top of this. I want this to be a bit darker than the water. Typically, water reflections are slightly darker than the subjects in which they reflect. So this, however, we have a lot of reflections, and those reflections will carry a lot of light. It's a very bright day. So I think because of the movements in the water, we can actually get away with making this a little bit darker in itself. And then as we get towards the top, we interject more sap green, titanium white, maybe a hint of green gold. And we'll do the detail work once this dries, but for now I think it's a very solid base layer. Then we'll do a little tapped blends between those two values. Okay, so we're back. We've given everything a chance to dry quite thoroughly, and now you can see little spots that are a little bit more thin. You can still see the canvas showing through. Some people really like this look. I think that it can add some additional depth. It can make it look painterly. So it's not something that's wrong with the canvas, and this is really up to you if you want to go back and cover that up. I think with this subject in particular, it can look really good. However, it is a different technique than what we've used in other areas of painting. So if you do this, I recommend trying to leave other areas a little bit more flowy, a little bit more thin. That said, I think I like it, but I don't want it entirely down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over some of the areas to thicken them, but not all, because I really like the base we built. With that, we are going to re-render a mid value to darker green. So sap green, oxide black, titanium white. We might also grab more of our green gold, just a hint of it for this. Put that there. Very good. Grab that. Now we'll switch our brush, and these applications will be done rather with the liner because we're just looking to apply it over smaller areas. So we're going to be very intentional with this. And I like the start, I like the color, I think it works well in with the rest. Part of me questions if it could be a little bit brighter and a little bit less saturated. So we add in the titanium white, that will brighten it. That will also simultaneously desaturate it a little bit, making it potentially the perfect next step. Ooh, it's definitely better. But I think yet again we could go brighter. Baby steps to mixing the perfect color. These mixes also don't have to be perfect. Sometimes it can be nice to have some areas a little bit darker, some a little bit lighter. That way you have additional variance. down here in the water and in the painting. Yeah, this is perfect. This is just what we wanted. It's one of those things where the areas that are thin are brighter because we can see the white canvas through it, and the white canvas is bright, right? At least in relation to the other pigments we have on here. So if we're covering that up with additional pigment and thickening it, but we still want it to be that brighter value, then we need to make our mix a little bit brighter. And just like that, I think it already looks so much better. It's just a little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra work. The beauty of doing this too is that we get to be very intentional with it. Again, there was a bit of a circular movement through a lot of this. And we'll start to be playful with that idea. Mostly in the next applications, but we can do hints of it now and here. Kind of creating this more spotty look to the water, which I think is quite good. We can also make a much brighter version of all of this with some titanium white and do a little bit of a highlight, a little bit of water that's just washing its way up on the shore here. Just create that separation between land and water. Nice and easy. You can even do it in the background, but I want it to be more subtle in the background, so I'm going to mix in some additional pigment there, and then you almost just lose it as we get into the back. We also, I think, want to thicken this back area. So, sap green, oxide black, hint of titanium white. That's pretty gray, so maybe a little more saturation. I think we darken it. Yeah. Good update. Good update. Very good. Okay. You know what? I think that's a lot better. I think we could play with this curve a little bit more. Typically, if the curve is perfect, it'll look a little faux, a little fake. So I'm just trying to break it up a little bit, make it a more unique, natural shape, and I think that'll add to the realism. We can also take these pigments, these darker mixes, and work them back into here for the sake of creating more movement, more diversity, more shape. And just like that, it's all a little bit better. Also, wanted to say a big thank you for listening, for painting along with me. Thank you for keeping this lovely traditional medium alive. Feel like, as we get older, as technology progresses, you see more and more digital art. And I love digital art. I think it can be a beautiful medium, especially the fact that you have literal light working through it in screens and monitors. But I also have a real appreciation for traditional art and mediums like acrylics, like oils, and just quite nice, quite wonderful that you are here actively keeping the medium alive and well, because it's a beautiful, wonderful medium that I think there are going to be less and less people who are proficient, excited, or talented in. And I think it's going to make the paintings that are out there, the painters that are out there, a little bit more rare. It's going to make traditional art like this a little bit more rare. And I think when that happens, you just really appreciate all that is out there, all that is being made. I know I do. Lots of little taps to create that additional movement and texture. Lovely. Okay. Very good showing there. I think now we switch on over to creating some highlights in here, something we are really yet to do, but it's fully dry now, so it should adopt paint quite well. We'll grab some of our sap green, a little bit of our green gold, hint of our titanium white, hint of our oxide black. Mix that up well. Switch on over to, you guessed it, the fan brush, which is also fully dry. And we'll start tapping towards the top, down, inwards, creating those unique clusters, shapes. Have that towards the bottom, that looks good. You kind of have multiple levels and layers within it. I think that can be a really big factor in making it look unique and interesting. Now we'll get more green gold, more titanium white. Make that mixture stand out significantly more. Grab more of that pigment. Find the right angles. And there we go. Beauty. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay. I think we put that down for a second. I think we pick up the smaller brush. I think we make a little bit of a darker mix because I did make this get a little bit too wide, a little too big. I like the idea of having little pieces that protrude and stick out though. So maybe we keep that the way it is. And I think at this point, I'm okay to let this brush dry as we work with the liner to solidify the final details in this little clustered area. So going in, tapping on the true highlights, doubling down on those areas that did naturally pop out and protrude through the use of the fan brush. And that's one of the lovely reasons I love working with a fan brush. It creates all of these little intricacies I wouldn't think to incorporate. It just naturally happens, and then I can kind of double down on them and continue to create those shapes and build on them in ways that feels good. But had we not had that, we probably wouldn't have such unique movements. Okay. Trying to ride that real balance of having water on the brush so I can get these sharp markings, but also not too much water to the point where it dollops like that. It is a balance. It's not always easy, but we go back and forth until we find it. It's also worth noting that these markings are all bigger than the markings we made with our fan brush. So we're not getting as much detail right now, but it is intentional applications. And I think the balance between the two is what makes for great paintings. Okay. It's quite a bit of water there. I think I'm pretty much done with these highlights for now though. Good. We still have burnt sienna on our palette. Let's grab a hint of that. Titanium white, oxide black. Let's make it a little bit blue. just so we tie in more colors of the sky. It's a shadow pigment. This is going to be for the ground underneath. Just a little bit though. Just a hint of additional color. Not a lot. And it kind of fades off into the darker mix that we have above. Yeah. We can add a hint of that reflected in here, underneath the almost white line. And then we can make a more gray version of that same mix. And just do some little taps and drags to diversify the brown that we incorporated down there. Beautiful. Okay, so far so good. I like our background, I like these trees, I like these. The reflection so far looks nice. We do still want to add all of the little movements in the water, but I think we do need to let this fully dry before we do that. And I do want to pull up the reference photo again before we jump into that. So I'm going to clean my brushes and then we'll back with the next step. Okay, so we're back. We have clean water. We are going to start working on the details in the water right down here, and I'm really excited to do so. So we're going to take our larger flat-headed brush, also clean. I'm actually going to move this over so I have some clean paper towel to wipe this on, just so we don't dilute it with some of the greens that we have over there. With that, we will grab a little bit of our blue, we'll grab a little bit of our sap green, titanium white. Oh, that's a nice color. Hint of oxide black, because I do want to darken it. And you know what? I want more saturation than that. So we go back to the blue, we go back to the sap, remix these. We're going to do this a couple of times. Again, we don't just go with the first pigment we mix, we remix until we get what we really want. And I think this is a great match for a lot of what we have going on in there. So we'll take that, I'll zoom out, we'll grab our liner brush, make that nice and damp, and then we'll start working these movements in. So I'm just going to move a little bit. Remember that we're working in this almost circular motion, but at the bottom, I think we'll start at the bottom just for the sake of ease. You can see how there are these more elongated lines which push that way. Let's start with some of those. Now these aren't going to be exactly like what we see on here, but it's a general idea. So to begin, you can see the top of this is pretty sharp, then it gets a little bit larger in the body, then maybe we skip a little area, and then we have it there, and then we skip a little area and we have it here. And the idea is that some areas of water are raised while others are lower, and the areas that are going up like that are catching light that's facing this way, and then the back side has a shadow. So this is an area that's raised, it's catching light, and then right behind it, darker. Now we can have a little bit more light on the other side of that drop where it starts to come up again. We're always trying to understand why we're painting the subjects that we are, because it allows us to render them better. Now maybe we have another larger, higher area that protrudes up right here. And you can see that these are all different sizes, different shapes, somewhat different distances from each other. And these do go partially this way, not too far, but I do think we can bring elements of this into the green here, and then it kind of dissipates as we move into that side. So far though, it's a little detail that is making a real difference. Let's grab more of that pigment. Let's continue to work up, and as we work up, we get farther away from the subject, so it's going to look more broken up. It's going to be smaller visually. So the start and stops will happen sooner rather than later. There's a pretty prominent area right through here. Again, I'll zoom in for you. Now we get into this larger movement. I'm just going to double down, look at this up close. A lot of these are pretty horizontal, but again, it kind of creates a little bit of a spiral effect. Let's mix more pigment because it is a pretty big area. We will need a substantial amount of paint. And I'm going to try to leave some of my original mix off to the side. That way we can use it as a reference. Very good, very good. Oh yeah, I love that. Okay. Might double down on some of our previous applications, just give them slightly more life. Doesn't have to be all of them. Probably shouldn't be all of them either. Just the more prominent ones that you really like. And we're going to, again, change the angle from being pretty diagonal to getting more and more horizontal. So this is just a little bit diagonal. And I'll show you what we're doing next. We're going to start to make it a bit more horizontal. Grab more. Have this go off to the side. Little taps and drags inside. And the smaller the markings you can make in here, as we do get farther away, the more realistic, the more detailed it'll look. And this is an area we do want to look very detailed. So we're getting more horizontal. Then up here it rounds a little bit. We do get to a point where it's far back where you actually don't see the rounding at all. It's just little dots, and sometimes they amalgamate into lines. And then the middle is a lot of these markings. Doing them originally with a pretty watery mix. That way we can get a really, really sharp movement. Means that a lot of it will be drying fairly semi-transparent, but we can always go back over these later and make them more thick. Trying to frequently go back and grab more pigment, because when you run out, you'll press harder with your brush to try to get the pigment off your brush, and you really don't want to do that here because the more you press with your brush, the larger the impression you'll make. And we don't want large impressions. We want really, really tiny ones. You can see I'm barely getting pigment off my brush through this process. Little bits here and there, but that's about it. It's a lot of going back and forth with the palette. Starting to bleed into the highlights, that's really nice. We'll have little hints of it up here. But this is one of those really relaxing portions of the painting where you're kind of doing the same thing over and over again. And you just get in one of those flow states. We get creative, now we stay creative, right? There we go. We're getting closer to us, so they're getting bigger again, they're getting a little more diagonal. And I like to jump back and forth from the distant applications to the closer ones, because it just lets us really reaffirm the ideas we have. We don't forget the process. Again, it's all pretty subtle right now, and intentionally so. You can see I'm still combining applications here and there. really shows up well in the darker negative space. Blends in a little bit in the highlights, but that's alright. Beautiful. Actually very, very happy with that. Let's do some more highlighted areas, rebuild them up. Okay, I like that. We'll zoom out for a bit. Do little taps in here. A little bit of highlight in the back. See, the more we do, the more it starts to make sense and fit together. That's starting to look really natural. It's time for real highlights, which means we take that same pigment we had, we just interject more titanium white, build that brightness, and we don't want it to be a pure white, we still want it to have the hue of what we're working with. We still want it to be that bluish green, gray. Then we come back in and you can see that it's brighter up. So we're going to honor and respect that. I'm going to try to put this over a lot of our past applications. A lot of this is just about building and layering. At the old condo, we had a lot of construction outside, and I always got to use the metaphor of it's like building a house, right? You start with the foundation, and it looks a little awkward, a little rough, and then slowly you add on the beams and the walls, and then things are painted, and you just build it up time after time, and you eventually render something that looks and feels warm and wonderful in a home. And this is very similar. Start off with some awkward base layers, void of real detail or character, and then you add a tap here, stroke there. You build it up, and then before you know it, you have something you made, you love. And that's really the magic of painting. It's what we're trying to do. Honor this wonderful medium. I think we'll add some highlights into just the middles of these sections. The tops and the middles, maybe. Don't want it through all of them, but here and there. Yeah, that looks really good. The areas that are kind of peaking and catching the most light in these, This is one of those jobs where you can do it quickly, and I have in the past, but I think if you do it kind of mindlessly, and you just relayer kind of half over something, half over another, it can look a little too messy. And I feel like you can almost tell. If you want it to look great, this is a section. While you do get in those flow states, I would recommend intentionality with leaving little dark spots in between your markings, slowly building up your markings, not getting lazy with it. I know it's a lot of repetition, but it's repetition where if you really respect it and the process, you end up with something great. I think we're getting there. I think we're really getting there. And of course, the more layers we add here, the brighter it'll get, because we're building on bright base layers now rather than over dark base layers. Because acrylics are all semi-transparent, you typically see the underlayer at least a little bit showing through. You get this optical blend, and now we're getting an optical blend with bright values rather than dark values. So you're seeing more of the innate color that you see on the palette through these markings. There we go. Little taps here and there, just for shimmers and sparklers and highlights. That is some dynamic water. Trying to move my head around the painting as we do this, because sometimes when pigment is wet and reflective, you can't actually see the brighter or darker values from all angles. You just kind of have to move around. So friendly reminder, if you're working with a lot of water in your pigments and your mixes, to move around the canvas and the light. Often you will see it in a pretty different way, and you'll get a more accurate view, understanding, and representation of what you're really working on. Good. Really good. We'll do some little taps at the end of the larger wave movements. That just means little dots here and there. Nothing dramatic, but just making it a little more playful. Now I don't want to overdo it, so I think for now I'm actually very, very happy with this. If anything, we could just do a little more off to the side here, but that's... I don't even know if it's necessary. We're giving it a try just so you can see what it'll look like if we do bring it all the way to the edge. It's that way in the reference photo. And you know what? I think it looks a lot better now. That actually worked really well. Glad we tried. If you try and you don't like it, it's okay. You can always just go back in with the same color that we have underneath for the greens and apply that over. That's the wonderful thing about acrylics, right? It's just so forgiving. If you do something and you don't like it, you cover it up, and you can do all of which in 10 minutes because it just dries so quickly. Okay, so with this looking good, I think we can move on to our next step. So we'll just grab a little bit more, actually. A hint of highlight through there. Little taps on there, little tap through here. Beautiful. Might be a little too much. Let's actually soften that. A little bit more finger painting. Yeah, I like that. Okay. Now, we're actually going to work on the base here because we want to build the greenery and the foliage on top of it. So we put that brush down, we pick this brush up, going to take off the excess pigment without trying to dilute this too much. And now we're going to work on this under area, which is a lot of burnt sienna, to be honest. Oxide black. Titanium white to brighten it, desaturate, thicken. And I think we'll just start by placing this all down here. Really simple base layer. We just talked about foundations, and this is one of them. Want to make sure that it's nice and thick, so I'll go over it a couple times. And when I go over it multiple times while it's still wet, I'm applying next to no pressure. If we apply any real pressure, we'll probably start ripping the paint off. We don't want to do that. We just want to build as much thick pigment as we can in this portion. So I think that's actually pretty perfect. We can add little spots of the same pigment up here. We could build grass around it, have a little bit of that ground still showing through. That can be a nice technique. So maybe we do a couple little portions in there. But from here, we can let it dry, or we can work in a very organic way, wet into wet with the liner. We can grab some of our titanium white, mix that in here, get this real amalgamation of various colors. Here I'll grab some mid value, and I'll just paint on the side of a rock. I'll move over here, another side of a rock, different angle of a stroke, and then a little tap here with a different color. We'll grab, again, a different color, have that towards the bottom. And what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to say light is coming this way, right? So the left-hand side of these rocks is going to all have highlight. We'll have different kinds of rocks. Some will be more flat, some will be protruding high, but we just are adding light to the tops of them. And now there are rocks piled on other rocks. So we're just painting the left-hand side on the tops of lots of rocks we are currently developing. See that? Super easy. As we get closer this way, towards the right-hand side, they're going to get bigger because we're getting closer to us. Their perspective will make the subjects look bigger. They're still the same size as the ones in the background. It's still the same type of rock, but we definitely have a different visual relationship with it. It's more textured, it's larger. Trying to make all of these rocks look a little bit different from each other, that's important. Some are closer together, farther apart. Good. Now, we'll go for a darker rock, so more oxide black in the mix. And we'll go into the crevices, the areas behind and in the back, underneath. You can separate some of the line work that you've done. Now the beauty of this is that you can leave the mid value darker brown in between the light application and the dark application. So you actually have 3 values now. Going to avoid adding this really dark mixture towards the back though, because we won't have as much variation in value back there because of that reflective light. We get more of those deeper shadows in the foreground. Similar to how the water and the foliage works. And then we'll let this dry, and then we'll refine once it's dry. It's so much easier to refine when we're not moving around wet pigment. But so far, I think this is a great start. And I think we'll take a bit more of that darker pigment and just blend it towards the top here, because there will be shadow from the greenery on it. It's not a pure black, but it is darker. Okay, so we are back. It is a brand new day. I have my larger flat-headed brush, clean water, fresh pigment for the most part, and we are going to begin in our final area of negative space here. That is these larger trees, and we are beginning yet again with a neutral green backdrop. That's something that's not too dark, not too light, very much in the middle, and something we can quite easily make darker and lighter. Can be a little bit more saturated than the mid-value ones that we did in the back because we are closer to us. We have more innate natural lighting, and I think we begin with just this. Again, we don't want it to be too dark, we don't want it to be too bright. I think this is a great in-between. If I really start to move it around, you can see the thin areas, so we don't want to do that too much. Instead, we go back to our palette, we grab more pigment, and we'll just apply this pretty liberally. I think we mix more pigment, We'll do this a number of times, as it is a rather large area. And it's also worth noting, my canvas might be a little bit different from yours, but I'm not using a typical canvas, I'm using a canvas board. And I find, this isn't with all of them, but I find for the most part, canvas boards are a little bit more porous. They let in more pigment, so they need more pigment to be applied to really stretch it. So just, it's one of those things where if you like painting and you like having a little bit more control of the pigment, you don't like it to go on and just slide everywhere, then I think canvas boards are typically a little bit better. They have less gesso. That's the actual reason why I find canvas boards have less gesso than regular canvases. And you can always apply additional layers of gesso to your canvases as well. That's not out of the realm of possibilities. But I think just out of the package from the store, if you want something with a little bit less gesso that absorbs the pigment slightly more, a canvas board is great. If you want something where the paint really glides everywhere, typically a regular canvas is a little bit better. And I don't know why this is common amongst most of the brands, but it is in my experience. I don't personally have a real preference. I'll kind of just use whatever's around at home, and very happily so. I feel like the style of painting is pretty similar. It just means, again, with this I do a little bit more pigment, a little bit more time, really. But it kind of slows me down to the point where I have more time to think about my actions, my choices, and I also like that for the creative process too. So I don't really have a preference. I think that they each have their benefits. I think that each of them can end up with essentially the exact same result. It's just a minor difference of how the paint moves and feels on the canvas. But again, even if you have canvas boards, you can add an extra layer of gesso. I never do. I personally, again, think the out of the box, out of the store style canvases are decent enough. I'm always happy. But if you do want something that's a little more smooth, add more gesso. If you want something that's a little less smooth, maybe try these canvas panels. That said, as you can see, this isn't a rectangle. It's not a giant box. We have an area that protrudes out here. We need to do that. We have different protrusions at the top, and we have lots of little branches that stick out on the sides. And we can do that by just taking the edge of the brush and having these protrude and stick out in such a way. It's quite easy. But again, I think we make this quite a bit larger, quite a bit more prominent. Give it some personality. As for the top area, we know that we have at least one tree that really protrudes here. And we'll just do a rough little painting for that guy. And then we have another tree that's kind of to the side, goes a little bit higher. There we go, trying to leave little openings in between, and we can go back and paint in more openings later. But we do want it to feel nice and airy. It's not going to be super dense through the entirety of it. It's important to keep that in mind. And now I think we'll actually make the mix a little bit darker, not dramatically so, because we want room to build into actual shadows, but I think we make it a little bit darker, try to keep that saturation, work that down here at the bottom, yeah, just like that. And that way, the bottom area, the back area are just a little bit darker, and then as we move higher, like this, it gets a little bit brighter. I don't mind if there are brush strokes in any of this because it is foliage. We want it to look natural, and typically for it to look natural, you have all of these little imperfections and unique spaces. I might even grab some of that darker pigment and just tap it fairly randomly throughout, and then do little X-shaped blends, but very imperfect ones. And that, as a whole, should make this a bit more interesting. Grab some more oxide black. You can see we're going back. We're doing this a couple of times. This bottom area should be the darkest as it's going to receive the least amount of light. And the rocks down here, the shadow areas are pretty dark too, so it'll look nice and cohesive pretty quickly. It'll make sense in the setting. And because we have so much wet paint on here, the pigment we have on here isn't the pigment we're getting on the canvas. We're getting more of an amalgamation of this and what we already have on there, which is kind of nice. Gives us this safer progression. But I think that looks good, and I think we wait for it to dry. Okay, now we're going to again zoom in, and you can see all those dark little taps and textures in there. Even these areas down here where it's much deeper in shadow, you have these openings but there's no light. That's what we're doing with the next step, and we've done something very similar previously. Now we'll grab our larger flat-headed brush, oxide black, sap green. We're not using the green gold just yet, but we are, as I'm sure you've guessed, switching back on over to the fan brush. Now this is fully dry. We are not working with any condensed bristles. We are going to start these taps towards the bottom. We're going to try to randomize them, so lots of minute rotations, as you know. Now with this, we're going to do a lot of these taps down towards the bottom. We'll let there be less and less as we move towards the left-hand side. You can see I'm kind of running out of paint, and that's actually ideal. Now we'll grab more paint. We're not going to apply it over here though. We're going to get the majority of it off over here. And then when we start to run out, then we can kind of finish off those taps in this section. It's important that the base here has the most of these, because we really are just getting so little natural light in between these big trees. All the branches are casting shadows, and we're just doing our best to represent said shadows. There we go. You can even take the larger flat-headed brush or the regular medium-sized flat-headed brush and block in larger areas of shadow if you want. I personally like to go about it like this. It's slower, but I feel like it gives me the most control and option in the painting process. And I just love painting, so I don't mind taking the extra time. I think this is going pretty well. Already like that a lot. However, we are just about out of paint here, so let's mix up a bit more. Let's go now with a hint of green gold in the mix. We're getting higher in the tree, and the shadows are going to start to get a little bit warmer. We're going to start in the back area, and then we'll start working our way up. If the mix isn't really different, if it looks very similar in the way I think mine does, then don't worry too much about going back over your previous areas with it. However, if it is pretty different, I would go back and splash this mix into your pre-established areas of trees. Another little hack you can do through this is your very first tap with the pigment might be the most prominent because you have the most amount of pigment. So I try to make that one vertical. That way if you do see a line, it kind of just looks like a portion of the tree rather than a shadow. And then we can build it out into one of the tree trunks or something of that nature. A branch later in the painting process. You can see how there are some areas that are a lot darker than others, as intended. We're going to go back in and try to make some areas look a little more full. Getting the majority of our paint off elsewhere, and then we'll just do some minute taps in a bunch of these areas. Already looking great. Already feeling pretty easy. I like that a lot. Okay, so now we're just going to spend slightly more time in areas we feel could use it, but for the most part, I think this is what we want. We let it dry, and then we jump back into it together with the next step. Okay, now you see how there are these prominent, larger branches throughout? These are what we want to paint next because we want a lot of the highlights on top of them. So let's mix up a couple of colors and have some fun. We are, for the first time in a while, going to grab some of our ultramarine blue, oxide black, a little bit of titanium white, mix those up fairly well. We want the blue in there because we want these to have a nice cool tone for the areas that are inset within. And with this, I'm actually going to use, I was going to use the larger flat-headed brush, but I think that marking is actually a little bit bigger than I want it to be. Luckily, I think it's also not dark enough. So we'll use the brush to make this a little bit darker, then we'll switch on over to our liner brush. And I'm going to start at the top, making as small of a marking as we can. And I'm not making one continuous marking, making lots of imperfect small ones which connect. That way we end up with something that looks a little more natural in the end. So, good start there. Really trying to think about where the peaks of these trees are. That gives me a good indicator of what we want to interject. Where we want to place them. Now those are both looking pretty straight, and I don't want them to all be so I think we'll try very actively to make this one have a bit more of a curve to it. We'll kind of go to the left here, and then we'll go back down to the right. You can see that they're also pretty imperfect. I'm leaving some openings. One thing that you might also notice is that these are all equally spaced apart. That's something you typically don't want. So we're going to create, let's say there's another tree right there. And then let's say there's one that kind of crosses into there. Now we're starting the smaller branches. If we don't like any of these, we can always cover them up later with little taps. So there's no real issue. Beauty, beauty. Work that up. Good. Then back down. Just trying different patterns. I'm really trying to break patterns, to be honest. It's not so much about making different ones, it's more about creating a lack of consistency. Once that starts to dry, we can make our next mix, which actually has a lot of our burnt sienna. You can see I'm mixing it into the old mix. We're adding a hint of our titanium white, and we'll use this for portions of these areas that feel might have a little bit of light. Just adding a slight highlight to that left-hand side. This will give it some dimension. We don't have to do it to all of it. Not all of it will receive light. But if I feel like there's an area that could benefit, we do our best to show and accommodate that. Typically it'll happen a little higher in the tree. And it's a really subtle detail, but again, it's the subtle details that accumulate and make for great paintings. Trying to be mindful of the camera and not put my brush in front of it too often, or rather my hand. I actually really like how this is turning out. This area is a little dark, to be honest, but that's okay. We can cover that up with foliage pretty simply. And we can even, if you want, you could grab some of that green mix and just cover it up now. Don't have to. Again, opportunities to do it in the near future, but depending upon your level of patience, just want you to see that it's very fixable. So don't worry too much if that happens to you. Now, the next application is a bright one. We are going to go back in and do more branches like this, but I do want some highlights on here first. And to do these highlights, we're going to need some really bright pigments. So we're going to clean our water, we're going to clean our brushes, and then we'll jump back into this. So we are back, clean water, we have our pigments, we have our clean brushes, and we are going to paint some highlights. I'm going to start with our green gold, as one would expect, our titanium white. Maybe we add a little bit of that sap green in as well, just so we have that transitionary pigment. Hint of our oxide black, but just a hint. And this is already looking really nice. Now we switch to our fan brush, which of course we do need to dry because we did wash it. I'm just taking off that water. In the interim, you're going to get this forking that can happen, which can actually look really nice, but to avoid the larger applications, we just do that little fan at the end. Kind of fitting, noting that it's the fan brush. But we are going to begin along the edges, as one does. Lots of little taps to build these highlights to be. And initially, much like everywhere else, it's probably going to look a little awkward, a little incomplete, and that's okay. That's just how this goes in the early stages. But once we get the majority of the edge comprised of these taps, I think we'll feel quite good. I'm also trying to create lots of little ones that protrude out farther than our initial green applications. We'll really notice the highlights towards the bottom because we're building on darker values. Up top it's a lot of bright values on bright values, so it's just not that noticeable. Also, the same thing happens as we move in, and there's a lot of angled taps like this on that side. However, on the other side, we're going to go the other way. So now the brush is pointing this way, not this way. In the middle, it can be a bit more flat, but we're not trying to do all of these techniques everywhere. We're taking little breaks, leaving some areas open. This area in particular needs to be quite bright, so we'll go back to it many times. But I don't want to do too much of it at once because I want to build this all in a balanced way, and that means going back and forth and making sure that we have the right amounts in other areas as well. So we're not overdoing it in the areas that we get really excited about. And then again, also because our branches get a bit heavier, they're not all going to leaf up at the end. We will have some that kind of drape down, even with the highlights. See that? Now we have some kind of in the middle. Beauty, beauty, beauty. Okay. Really like where we're going here. So far it's looking natural. I think we have real elements of realism. It's starting to come alive. Let's grab, again, more of our sap green, hint of our oxide black. And that's a pretty good color match. To go a little bit darker, especially as we move inwards to the tree where it's going to get a little bit darker, where we're going to have those shadows. Let's also, maybe we do this area first before we make it darker. Get the tops of the trees, which will definitely be receiving a lot of light. And much like before, this is getting a very wide application of highlights, and that's good. However, we can do a much more precise job with the liner brush later in the process. Now we can layer this tree over this tree by having more prominent clustered taps over these ones. So they're going to crisscross to a point because a lot of the ones on this tree on the side go up this way. These ones are going the other way over top, but because we're applying more paint, more taps, it's kind of taking over in a way that we actually really want. A big part of these taps is knowing where to leave openings and where to double down on the taps, and this is a good area to double down on the taps. We can also go back and double down on the taps on the left-hand side of this tree, instill more light, which does make sense for the subject. And then as we start to run out, we can add a little bit down here. We will have less because, of course, we just have a lot of shadows in this space, but we still will have some. And then we have more trees over here. I think I want a bit more up here actually first. And we're going to do all of the ones on the left-hand side of it, going up, and then to the side, and then downwards. You can see it's a bit less paint, and very intentionally so. I want the edge to be a bit darker as a whole. That way we have that vignette effect, but I also want there still to be some light. And we also need that texture. So we need a bit of this, but not too much. Might take the extra initial applications off in areas like these. Here now on this tree, the right hand side, we are going this way with our taps. And then we use the excess at the bottom here. Trying to keep it pretty light, but oh yeah, that looks really good. Now we'll build out more of the midsection to this one. You can see portions of the tree still showing through. You have the middle, you have a couple branches. Trying to be very mindful of keeping some of my favorite areas prominent. Love the realism we can render in these scenes. And we're about to make it look a lot better even. Again, one of those things where you just trust the process, and we do get there. Beautiful. Okay, now for the first time, provided I can open this on camera, give me a second, there we go. We're going to be using cadmium yellow deep hue. And I love this specifically for summer scenes and sunsets. I like it because it's a yellow, but it's a very warm yellow. It's a little bit darker, and it's great for adding warm light to greenery. It's great for sunsets. Here we'll grab some, put it in there, we'll grab some titanium white, we'll brighten all of this. Oh yeah. And that's much more akin to what we actually have in the reference photo. I don't want to do it too early, and I don't want to do too much of it. I think there's a lot there. I want mine to be a bit more subtle, but I do like it a lot. We're going to tap it towards the top. This will stand out next to all of our other applications because it is quite a bit brighter. It's more saturated. This and the green gold together are just in my opinion, the perfect green summery highlight. There's no better mix that I found anyway, or that I prefer, but you have a lot of light on that edge, and we are soaking it in light. There we go. Now we can add some to the highlights in these portions of the trees too. Have these pop in a brand new way. It was already quite prominent, and it was already, I would say, the main visual sticking point of the painting, but we can make it even better with this mix. The only thing you have to be careful of is that this doesn't dramatically outshine everything else, because you still want to balance. Part of realism is having things look natural and cohesive. And if something looks too saturated or bright next to everything else, you can kind of get this neat but surreal look to it. And we're not looking for that. We're looking for natural still. We're still looking for realism. So we are still being careful. There we go. Building it up. Again, mostly towards the tops. A little bit in the back there. Beautiful. Little highlights here and there. Protrusions. It's okay if portions of the tree at the bottom get a little confusing. Is it that tree? Is it that tree? That confusion adds to that realism that we're talking about. Little areas out here that kind of stick out, catch slightly more light. We can also interject a little bit of this just on the tops of these bushes. I don't want it really working its way down in any dramatic way. I just want it right up there. And I think that is fantastic for our fan brush. Now we'll switch on over to our larger flathead. Make sure it's nice and damp. Clean that up. Go with maybe even more titanium white, even more green gold. It's starting to dry, so we'll have to use that. A little bit more of our cad yellow. Beautiful, bright, saturated, warm. There we go. Now we'll take our liner and we'll start implementing this very intentionally. We can also do so in these trees, like that. And this is the warmth they haven't had yet, and we want it to look cohesive with the rest of the painting, so we can add just a little bit. We don't want to add so much that it takes away from over here, but there can be small applications, unintentional ones. That's what we're doing. That said, we are nearing the end of the painting here, so if you stuck around, I want you to know that you are part of the, on average, 13% who starts watching these videos and makes it to the end. And because of that, I think you are probably going to have a pretty great painting. If you took the time, if you had the patience to listen to all of it, taking all of the tips and ideas, I think you're probably really setting yourself up for success in the painting. And I really commend you on taking that time. I know that these days patience and just being able to sit with the same thing becomes harder and harder, you know, in the they call it the attention economy. But I'm a big believer of being able to calm the mind and really sink in to something, soak it in, really absorb it. And again, if you're here, it means you're also probably pretty good at that, and I think that's a great skill to have for getting great at things. Okay, so we're back. It is essentially day 3 of working on this, and I wanted to give it a little bit of time to take those steps back, see how we feel about it. And now that we are back, I can see a couple things that I do want to work on. So we're going to grab our clean flat-headed brush, grab some of that titanium white pigment. We'll grab a hint of our ultramarine blue. We'll mix up a much brighter bluish white than we have had on here, just like so. We'll grab our liner, make sure that's nice and damp, and then I'm going to double down on some of the markings that we have through here, particularly at the top of this stretch, because I want more diversity in between the little sparkles of water that we have. And I'm trying to go in with pretty thick pigment, despite the fact that it is watered down. We just want this to look like it's really shimmering and create a little bit of variance as well in the painting. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Sometimes all it takes is a tiny little addition, and I think that's a pretty fantastic start. Now we'll make it a bit more blue. I think we'll wrap a little bit of this water around here. And that has a bit too much water on the brush. You can see that the stroke ended up being large because of the water itself, not because of the actual pigment. Now we're just creating some of those little separative areas. As it dries, it'll look brighter because it's just wet and the wetness is making it look a little bit darker, but I think that's actually quite nice. Again, we'll clean off our brush, and I think from here, I'm just taking a good look at it. I think we go back to some blues up here as well. Now, I want to remix essentially the same color we used in our sky. It's probably lost on our palette at this point, so we are just going to make a nice, bright, thick blue. Bit of gray in there. The primary, rather the more prominent pigments in this really are the titanium white and the blue. You'll have a little bit of oxide black, but it'll be minimal. Once we have this mixed up, we'll create some openings in our trees. And we're going to hope that this is pretty similar to the areas around. I'm also going to darken the camera just a little bit for you, just because I can tell it got a bit brighter outside. That looks good. That looks good. Yeah. So now we're just going back into our tree, tapping in some openings. We will want to work on our trees again, but for now, this does help. You can create big spots, little spots. Not too concerned, though as you get farther down, you are going to have to brighten this, because it does get brighter as we move downwards in the sky. You just need to remember that this changes as well. But for now, we'll do lots of taps. Beautiful. Lots of separation in there. Just trying to build out the diversity. I do want to randomize this a little bit more than I have. I think that would have a good impact. That means making some areas bigger, some smaller. There we are. Okay, so far so good. Yeah, I like that one too. If we overdo it, it's easy to just go back in and add in more green, so don't worry too much. And we'll make, again, a much brighter mix for the areas that are a little bit lower. There'll be more openings towards the sides because that's where the foliage is less full. There we are. Okay. One of those areas that just requires quite a bit of focus, you know? That said, big fan of all of our additions through there. I think now maybe we get a little bit of our cad yellow, titanium white, maybe a hint of our oxide black, and we could grab more of our burnt sienna, but I think I actually want to make the highlight more of a gold. So we're sticking to these pigments, and then we're going to add a little bit of a gold highlight down into here. Little taps amongst the rocks, areas that'll catch more light than others. Especially along the edge that there will be that light working in. Yeah. Don't need to do too much of it, and to be honest, that might be a little bit stark, so we'll just grab a slightly darker mixture, go back in, do a bit of a blend. Don't be afraid to try things. It's always so easy to remedy and fix when you're working with acrylics. And that's what we're doing. Good. Okay, now we have some extra depth there. Next, I think we go back to the greenery. And you know what, I say that, let's do a bit more in the bodies of the trees. Let's grab some burnt sienna. This is a really fun part of the painting because we're done a lot of it, and now we're going back and we're doing refinement in a lot of different spaces. So let's grab our burnt sienna, oxide black, titanium white. Beautiful color, great highlight for portions of the bark and tree. I'm going to try to find the previous areas, build on those as best I can. There we go. There we go, I like that. Again, we don't want to do too much, and this is just where we feel there will be real openings where light will pass through more dramatically, and we'll get to see some highlights on the bark and the trees. Now let's go for a darker mix. Oxide black, maybe a bit more. Same brush, same idea, but on the other side. Highlights on the left, shadows on the right. And the bottom. And we'll just go back and forth with a couple of these till we end up with what we really want. You can have it blend or you can have it not blend, really up to you. No real wrong there. Because it's a tree texture, it could look a little rough, and it wouldn't be bad if it did. There. You can see we're really going back and forth with a number of these. You can even add little ones throughout. Maybe add a bit more titanium white to the mix for the areas that really pop. Being pretty careful to not overdo it because it is stark. Good. I love painting little branches. Always so relaxing. There we go. Okay, now that we have those implemented, I think we go back to some highlights in the trees. So we're going to take all of that darker pigment off of our brush. I'm going to make the camera a little bit brighter because again, I think that changed a little bit. There we go, that should be good for you. And we'll get back to the mix. That said, again, big thank you to everybody here. Big thank you to everybody up over on Patreon for making this lesson happen. We are doing that big new series over there, so if you haven't, check it out. But if you're new here, this is your first time watching the channel, congratulations on making it so far into the video. Again, good for you. I think that'll translate into some great work. That said, if you haven't checked it out, there is a link to a Patreon down below, and there you can get access to the traceable for this, the video where we show sketching it all out in real time. Also post the reference and over 100 bonus lessons that you can't find up here on YouTube. We have a bunch on big 24 by 36 inch canvases, but there are also a lot that are this size as well, cityscapes and different things. So if you're interested in just getting a lot more of these lessons, or the traceables, the references, the real-time drawing videos, do check it out. I also have all of my ebooks, including Acrylics for Beginners, which is essentially the essentials, everything you need to know before you jump into your first acrylic painting. That's up there, along with additional ebooks rather, with a bunch of traceables. Sometimes I get a little tongue twisted when I talk about it, but a lot of good stuff. And again, if you just want to say thank you to the channel, help support, keep things up and running, then Patreon's the best way to do that. I love the light that we have down here. This was a big step, and I think it's making a really big difference. We're just allocating highlights very intentionally with the liner. I'm not doing too much. But if we do it down there, we definitely need to up here. There we go. Lovely. We can do more. We will do more. Trying to take it slow though. Trying to make sure that that which we apply we really want. Just because it is so bright and prominent at this point. Little hints of that light showing through the openings. Hints of that light showing up on the larger branches that protrude in here. But not too many. I want to keep that relatively subtle. Good. Easy way to build a lot of volume quickly. These feel like they're really sticking out, catching a lot of light. Won't do any too low because we just won't have that much light down there, but through here I think it's great. Now I'm starting to run out of pigment, so my application's a little more watery, which means my application's a little darker, so we can move it into those darker areas with better ease. We can also take it and apply it to the tops of these guys. But just the tops. Hint right there. Yeah. Okay. I'll be honest, I think this essentially concludes our painting session. I love how quickly this really just came into itself. I feel like it needed that one little painting session and it made all the difference. Friendly reminder that as you are painting your version, if it doesn't look incredible in the beginning, that's okay. Just keep at it and we will get there. With that said, I'd love to know, what would you like for me to paint in an upcoming lesson? I have a folder full of reference photos that I've been collecting from different suggestions, but I'm always looking to build on it. I was just having a conversation the other day with somebody about trying to paint some florals this year, which is something I am pretty excited about. But of course, we are also working on the Patreon exclusive lesson, so there's a lot of art happening. I'm always happy to expand that collection of ideas. I feel like the longer I have a subject in mind, the longer I have to look at different reference photos and just kind of digest the details in it, the techniques that I'd use, the better it ends up being. So I like to get the ideas sooner rather than later, and then, you know, we can work on those and implement it. But with that, I'm very, very happy with how this one turned out. I think that it's a great introduction to summer. I think I can really feel it, and at the end of the day, I feel like if you can feel the painting, then you've accomplished what you really set out to do. Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about creating the most realistic looking subject. I think for me, it's about a subject that does render emotion in one way. Maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's just you look at it and you feel the sun on your skin, and that brings you back to a memory or makes you excited about life yet to come. And I just think that we were able to find that with this one. So keep working on your paintings. If it's going through an awkward stage, that's a-okay. Just keep adding in those layers. You will get there. And if you haven't started yet, again, have fun, enjoy. It's acrylics, it's forgiving, it's a real pleasure to work with, and I'm sure you'll find that too. I am excited about working on the next one. I think I just uploaded the drawing video to Patreon, and now that this is done, I think I'll do a little bit of editing, and then I'll go to the art store and pick up some new canvas so we can start on some new projects. But yeah, as per usual, big thank you to all of you for watching. Big thank you to all of you up over on Patreon for making this lesson and all the lessons like it happen. This was a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. And I will see you soon with another one. So above all, as always, please stay creative.